Hey everybody, Blake T Wilde here, and today I'm heading into the McFarlane Toys aisle. McFarlane Toys have made some big action figures. Now it's time to finally take a look at 4 very distinct big action figures by McFarlane Toys. And leave a like if you enjoy the action figure reviews on the channel. First up is Kalibak. Kalibak was created by Jack Kirby and first appeared in New Gods issue 1 from 1971. Known as the Scourge of Apocalypse, Kalibak was the brutal yet somewhat dim-witted firstborn son of Darkseid himself. Kalibak is no stranger to action figures, though. He first appeared in plastic form during the famous Superpowers action figure line way back in 1985, and since then he's had a sporadic yet very diverse range of figures released. Although his design here is based on his appearance in the 2015 event from the much-maligned New 52 era of DC Comics, this figure still exudes classic Kirby energy. He's massive, he's muscular, he's menacing, and I'm always happy to add more Jack Kirby creations to my collection. Taking a look at his articulation, Kalibak's head can spin 360 degrees thanks to this absolutely giant dumbbell joint in his head. His hair is a soft plastic, which, while not entirely a hindrance, does still get in the way. He can look up that far, down, not at all, but he does have a great silhouette. He can rock his head back and forth with extreme ease like a true rocker. Kalibak's torso rotates and swivels wildly on another dumbbell joint, and here is his Kalibak. His arm can lift up that much, rotates all the way around, not at all hindered by the soft rubber of his one shoulder pad. He must be a lefty. Single-jointed elbows with an uncharacteristically classic style of wrist articulation from McFarlane Toys. Kalibak's legs go out this far forward, cannot go very far back. He does have a single-jointed knee, as well as a solid-as-a-rock ankle hinge. And toe articulation. Here's Kalibak at his widest stance possible, with both feet flat on the floor. Taking a closer look at the detail of Kalibak, his head sculpt is really where it's all at. It's so wonderfully well done and grotesque. The rest of his body is rather simplistically painted in that simple flat color scheme, but all of the detail that we've come to expect from McFarlane Toys is there. For accessories, Kalibak comes with this. A sort of brass knuckle weapon staff made out of a soft rubber. However, due to the absolute solidity of his hand, it is nigh impossible to get it into his grip unless you use a hairdryer or hot water to loosen up the plastic. For size comparisons, here he is next to his papa, Darkseid by Mezco Toys. His creator, Jack Kirby from NECA, the Marvel Legends X-Men 97 Wolverine, and a more average height Marvel Legends Amazing Fantasy Retro Spider-Man. And of course, Morris from Shang-Chi. Overall, I think that this is a very fun figure to own, especially if you're a fan of the New Gods and the more out-there concepts of the DC universe. Unlike previously released Kalibak figures, I feel like this one is probably the most in line with the character. It is just such a monstrous brute who is fully intimidating, until he takes a beating by his brother Orion. My main complaint is that his left foot is a bit finicky. It seems like just about every McFarlane figure I buy has that issue, and in addition, whenever I pose him, it just seems like every other part of his body wants to start moving on its own. But for the purposes of display, he's absolutely wonderful. And for the purposes of play, he is a fine addition to the toy box and a great way to get a child interested in Jack the King Kirby. Now we just need McFarlane Toys to roll out more New Gods characters. I need a Big Barda, damn it. I'm shocked that, knowing McFarlane's respect and admiration of Jack Kirby, that he has not gotten the company to do more of his creations. I can't imagine that the audience would be that big, especially for New Gods, unfortunately, but come on, Todd. Up next, we have Frankenstein. This iteration of the character originally appeared in Grant Morrison's Seven Soldiers from 2006. An absolutely fantastic series that I highly recommend, and funnily enough, Frankenstein, along with a bunch of other superheroes, faced off against Kalibak in Final Crisis number 5. Taking a look at his articulation, his head swivels exactly as you'd expect. He can look down a fair amount and looks up very well. His arms lift up this high, rotate all the way around, not at all hindered by his duster. Bicep swivel, which does get hindered by his extreme musculature. Single-jointed elbow that bends quite well. His wrist with the wonderfully sculpted gloves swivels and hinges like the typical McFarlane figure. His torso is hindered by the vest and the trench coat. He cannot bend forward, but he can lean back a fair amount. For a fellow with legs that go all the way up, they sure don't go all the way out, but they do go all the way back. Frankenstein has double-jointed knees, which are hindered by the trench coat, ankle hinge and swivel, no rocker, but fret not, fetishists, he does have toe articulation. Let's look at the detail of this desecrated carcass of Mr. Stein. His head sculpt is gnarly and decrepit, with piercing lime green eyes that are cast in shadow via his massive brow, the classic bolts appearing somewhere in his head like every Frankenstein's monster has to have, and the stitching around his cranium is so off-putting. The stitching also continues along his ruinous green arms, and his vest is very well detailed with intricate little buttons and latches along the breast and collar. He looks like he is very ready to attend a My Chemical Romance concert. Or he's gonna attempt to sell boys band equipment to small towns in 1910s America. The rest is very basic, with a simple black wash or dry brush effect. For some strange reason, I noticed that his belt buckle is unpainted, and I can only imagine it's because the designers just figured that his vest would keep it covered, which it does. His boots are perhaps my favorite part of this figure. I just adore the charcoal coloring and the beautifully sculpted texture of leather on them. Frankenstein's only accessory is this soft rubber sword, which did get bent out of place while I had him sitting around waiting to be reviewed. It slides into the holster loop along his back. For size comparisons, here he is next to the previously reviewed Kalibak. As you can see, Kalibak is short and squat like a teapot, and Frankenstein is tall and thick like a lab beaker. Here he is next to a normal scaled Marvel Legends figure, Spider-Man. Here he is next to X-Men 97 Wolverine. Now tell me that this isn't a fight that you would like to see. Another McFarlane toy that's a monstrous green thing. The Warhammer 40k Orc, and an almost equally tall fellow green DC character, Swamp Thing. And finally, here he is next to Morris from Shang-Chi. This is a figure I would suggest to anybody that really needs a Frankenstein figure that's not from a Universal picture. I mean, come on, when was the last time a company actually released a Frankenstein figure that wasn't based off a Boris Karloff, a cereal mascot, or a turtle? The design is just so unique and utterly full of character, but it is definitely a very niche market for the Seven Soldiers version of Frankenstein. I don't think this figure ever really had a big deal made over him over the past year or so since his release, so I'm sure he gets discounted during every major Amazon sale, and that's where I would recommend you get your hands on him. He does fit very well between both DC and Marvel, both of whom have their own versions of Frankenstein. If you're familiar with the video game Arkham Asylum, then you'll be all too familiar with this iteration of the Joker. This is what the Joker turns himself into after he takes a modified version of the Venom drug called Titan. The Joker used the Titan on himself as a last-ditch effort to once and for all kill the Batman. This is not the first time that Titan Joker was released in action figure form, as back in 2012, the figure was released via the DC Collectibles line. That version was far bulkier, with a musculature more in line with the video game. This same figure, however, would be re-released by McFarlane Toys as a special glow-in-the-dark edition. Starting from the top of this Mr. Burns look-alike, the Joker can look up this far, down this much, his head can swivel horrifically side to side, his arms extend that far, and he does have a wonderful butterfly joint which allows both horizontal and vertical movement. There is a lot of articulation in this figure. Double-jointed elbows and a very unconventional wrist articulation for McFarlane Toys, simply a swivel and hinge. His horribly hunched over torso can barely move, unfortunately, just above the diaphragm and the waist. His legs extend very far forward, but nearly nothing back, but he does have double-jointed knees with very thin ankle joints that includes swivel, rocker, and, for the fetishists, toe articulation. Going over the details, it's a giant, horrifically monstrous version of the Joker. Come on, if McFarlane Toys got that wrong or didn't accomplish that goal, I would be worried. Thankfully, they did, and he is just ghastly to look at. From his wounds and blood splatters where his skin is torn open to his protruding bones. Of course, I personally would have liked to have been even more gruesome, but I understand why not, because this is a mainstream retail toy line. Everything from a sculpting level is just so well done. Unfortunately, I hate the end result. Look at that! Do you remember earlier when I said just about every figure I get from McFarlane has an issue with their left leg? And it's not just this one. The glow-in-the-dark version also does this. But it does mean that you can get Titan Joker to lie back in a nice, seductive Mrs. Robinson-esque pose. For size comparisons, here he is next to the only two Batman figures I don't have in storage, the original Mego Batman and the Mattel Batman Vampire, who I suppose fits in quite well with this monster Joker. X-Men 97 Wolverine, Marvel Legends Amazing Fantasy 15 Retro Spider-Man. For no reason in particular, here he is next to Egon Spengler from the Ghostbusters Plasma series. And of course, here he is next to Morris from Shang-Chi. Overall thoughts? I'm not bearing the lead here at all. This figure was a letdown. I picked it up on sale, and while I do enjoy the design and the overall vulgarity of this clownish fiend from my nightmares, he is a disappointment. Like I said, the figure just doesn't really work. He can't hold his own weight due to the immensity of his upper body, the spindliness and weakness of his legs, the small ankle joints, the weak knees. Unboxing it and learning that was the reality was such a thrill killer moment. I was so excited to have finally gotten the Titan Joker, especially with the prices of the original one being skyrocketed over the past 12 years. Then I found the absolute disappointment of a otherwise well-made figure, rendered horribly, nearly unusable due to poor articulation. He's a better inanimate figure than he is an action figure. But that said, once you do get him into some monstrous poses, he really is a marvel to behold, and he makes a fantastic antagonist against any Batman figure in their collection. Also, he's slimy? Like, why does he feel slimy? Every time I handle this figure, it feels like it and then subsequently my hands are coated in a thin layer of slick slime. What is that? Finally, we reach what is perhaps the best MegaFig that McFarlane Toys has ever released. The Violator. The Violator first appeared in Spawn number 2 in 1992. Later revealed to be the oldest and most powerful of his 4 demonic brothers, Violator acts as a guide to the Hellspawn of Malbolgia's army. He was also the lead character in the Violator miniseries written by Alan Moore. The Violator, aka the Clown, has been adapted outside of comics a fair amount. First, he was played by John Leguizamo in the 1997 Spawn film. Then he was a reoccurring antagonist and villain in the 1997 to 1999 Spawn HBO series. And more recently, he cameoed in Mortal Kombat 11 and was an unlockable skin in a Call of Duty game for some reason. Although the Violator was traditionally drawn in a way that's actually not too dissimilar from the Titan Joker, you know, spindly and atrophied, he was redesigned within the past 5 to 10 years to be a hulking brute that this figure is based on. Hashtag not my Violator. Going over his demonic articulation, his head can move down that far, but it really hurts to do because he's so spiky. He cannot look up, although his jaw is articulated, meaning he can open and close it. He cannot look side to side. His arms go out this far, rotate all the way around, no bicep articulation, single-jointed elbow, and his wrists swivel on one massive hinge, which raises his massive clawed paw up and down. His torso is made up of 3 parts, the pelvis, abdomen, and thorax, which means that he can bend this far forward, cannot go backward as much as he does just kind of straighten himself out, and he can pivot side to side. His legs do not extend forward, but they do rotate exceptionally well backward. He does have single-jointed knees with digitigrade knee joint, and his ankle articulation is very tight on the hinge and swivel. Taking a look at the details, because that's where the devil is. This is no small feat. Oh my god, it is so expertly done. The Violator is a massively grotesque demon by McFarlane Toys. Of course, it's going to look amazing. Of course, it's going to be awesome. I really love how they rendered his compound eyes. That was always such a striking visual from the comics, and especially in the HBO series. In terms of size comparison, I don't have any spawns outside of storage, so here he is next to Wolverine from X-Men 97, Amazing Fantasies 15 Spider-Man for a more average Marvel Legends size, another demon with horns, the Terror Dog Sentinel from the Ghostbusters Plasma series, Vince Clortho from Diamond Select, Dinky the Dinosaur from Fallout New Vegas, and of course, Morris from Shang-Chi. While I wasn't a fan of this redesign of the chunky Violator, I was won over by this action figure. I originally bought the figure with plans of sculpting it into a Rancor from Star Wars, but it's just such a well-made toy that I'm not going to do that. It just works too well on its own. And this is possibly the heaviest McFarlane MegaFig that they have made thus far. You could crack somebody's head open with this thing. And this is, without a doubt, the best Mega figure that McFarlane Toys has ever made. Which makes sense. It's Todd's baby. His horrible, drooling, fanged monster baby. This is the Mega figure I would recommend the most out of not just this grouping I discussed over the course of this video, but all of the Mega figures thus released by McFarlane Toys. If you like monsters, if you like horror, if you like giant, bulky action figures that fit in anywhere in your collection, I highly recommend picking him up if you ever come across the Violator. And it's also a sharp and pokey figure that hurts to move. Let me know what you thought of these figures I reviewed in the comments below. Do you collect McFarlane Toys? If so, have you gotten your hands on these behemoths? Do you enjoy the aspect of the Mega figures? I do. It's a very nice way to get larger, interesting, more unique characters out on the shelves, which would be great from a company such as Hasbro. But that really is the great thing about McFarlane Toys being owned by Todd McFarlane himself. He doesn't have to answer to shareholders. He's not a multimedia all-encompassing company like Hasbro or Mattel, who have hundreds of licenses and have to appease every single product line. McFarlane can make these massive figures. He probably does so at an impact to the company's earnings, but he gets people onto his side this way. He wins the court of public opinion for McFarlane Toys. He can say, "Oh, well, would you look at the massive action figure, this giant piece of plastic that I'm giving you for such a decent price compared to what you're getting over at the other companies, bud?" He's a very smart businessman, and I really hope that we see more and more of these Mega figures coming out, because at this point, they're actually the only McFarlane Toys I collect outside of very specific characters that I'm interested in. And as always, let me know what you thought in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe for more content just like this. Check out my comic book focused videos if you haven't already. Follow me on Instagram at NotBlakeWild and at Comic Shtick Podcast, my weekly comic-based podcast. Check out my Patreon for early access to videos, my comic books, and movie commentaries. All of the links are in the description below. And I'll see you next time. Bye!